The exorcism that made the possession stronger. This case is remembered not because the ritual failed, but because something changed when it was attempted. The prayers were correct. The procedure was followed. But after the ritual began, the presence intensified. The subject had shown typical early signs. Withdrawal during prayer. Unusual responses to scripture. Periods of silence followed by brief agitation. Nothing violent. Clergy authorized a formal exorcism. The ritual began according to protocol. The priest spoke calmly. Assistants remained positioned nearby. For several minutes, the subject remained still. When holy water was applied, there was mild resistance, but nothing unexpected. The first shift came during the primary invocation. As the priest repeated the command, the subject's breathing steadied instead of worsening. Observers initially interpreted this as progress. Then the voice responded, not loudly, not angrily, more clearly than before. It spoke without hesitation, articulate, composed, and stronger than during prior evaluations. When scripture was read again, the response came faster. When commands were issued, the resistance appeared more coordinated. The priest later noted something unsettling. Before the ritual, the presence reacted inconsistently. After it began, the reactions became precise, as if something had adjusted. The session paused. Clergy reviewed procedure. No wording had been altered. No steps skipped. The ritual resumed. This time, the voice interrupted mid-invocation and completed the final phrase correctly. That moment ended the attempt. A senior cleric ordered suspension until further review. In the following days, the subject's condition appeared more stable, but also more controlled. Responses were clearer, movements more deliberate. The priest's report contained a single observation. Confrontation sometimes reveals structure. The church later revised evaluation guidelines. Ritual timing would no longer depend solely on symptom severity, but on behavioral patterns. The case was sealed. The subject eventually recovered after a later intervention conducted under different protocol. The final note in the archive reads, "Resistance does not always weaken when challenged. Sometimes it becomes organized. Some cases frighten because of what happens. Others because of what changes after intervention. If you're drawn to Catholic mysteries, sealed church cases, or items tied to faith and protection, I keep those collected in my Amazon store. Nothing required. Some people just prefer not to leave stories like this without grounding. So tell me, do you think the ritual made the possession stronger or revealed how strong it already was?" The case where the demon refused to leave. This case is remembered not because the ritual failed, but because the presence did not respond in the way any prior case had. The commands were issued. The ritual was completed. But when it ended, nothing had changed. The subject had been under evaluation for several weeks. Signs were consistent with earlier cases. Withdrawal during prayer. Unusual responses to sacred objects. Periods of calm followed by brief agitation. Clergy approved a formal exorcism. The ritual began according to protocol. The priest spoke clearly. Assistants monitored the subject. Initial reactions appeared typical. Resistance during scripture. Restlessness during invocation. Nothing unexpected. But when the primary command was spoken, a moment when response usually escalates, the room remained still. The subject did not struggle, did not speak, did not react at all. The priest repeated the command, silence. When asked to identify itself, the voice answered calmly, "I am already where I intend to be." That response unsettled the clergy. Not hostile, not defiant, certain. The ritual continued through its full sequence. Every prayer spoken, every step completed. At the conclusion, the subject remained conscious calm, unchanged. Observers later noted the absence of the usual release. No collapse, no exhaustion, no shift in demeanor, only quiet. The session ended under review. Follow-up evaluations confirmed the presence had not withdrawn. But something else had changed. The subject began responding more predictably to clergy instructions. Not resisting, not leaving, simply remaining. In his report, the priest wrote, "Departure was never negotiated. Presence was simply maintained." The church later revised guidance for similar cases. Some situations, they concluded, require prolonged intervention rather than a single ritual. The case was sealed after extended care eventually resolved the condition. The final notation in the archive reads, "Absence of departure does not equal refusal." Sometimes it indicates duration. Some cases frighten because of what happens. Others because of what doesn't. If you're drawn to Catholic mysteries, sealed church cases, or items tied to faith and protection, I keep those collected in my Amazon store. Nothing required. Some people just prefer not to leave stories like this without grounding. So tell me, do you think the presence refused to leave? Or was it never meant to leave quickly? The ritual that backfired. This case is remembered not because the ritual was incorrect, but because the outcome did not follow the expected direction. The wording was precise. The timing was correct. Yet after the ritual began, the situation reversed. The subject had been under observation for several days. Symptoms were stable. No escalation. No physical aggression. Clergy determined the timing was appropriate for a formal exorcism. The ritual began according to protocol. The priest spoke clearly. Assistants monitored the subject. At first, reactions appeared typical. Mild agitation during prayer. Increased tension during scripture. Nothing unusual. But during the central invocation, the subject suddenly became calm. Not relieved, composed. The shift was immediate. When the priest repeated the command, the voice responded more confidently than before. Clearer, stronger. Observers later noted the presence appeared less reactive and more deliberate, as if the ritual had clarified something rather than weakened it. The priest paused the session briefly to review the text. No errors were found. The ritual resumed. This time, the voice completed part of the invocation before the priest finished speaking. That moment halted the procedure. A senior cleric ordered suspension pending review. In the following hours, the subject's condition remained stable but more controlled. Responses were precise, movements measured. The priest's report contained a single observation: intervention may reveal readiness. Later analysis suggested the ritual had been initiated during a phase when confrontation strengthened resistance rather than weakened it. Guidelines were adjusted afterward. Future evaluations would include extended observation before escalation. The case was sealed once the subject recovered, following a later intervention under revised timing. The final note in the archive reads, "Correct procedure does not guarantee correct timing. Some cases frighten because of what goes wrong. Others because of what changes when everything seems right. If you're drawn to Catholic mysteries, sealed church cases, or items tied to faith and protection, I keep those collected in my Amazon store. Nothing required." Some people just prefer not to leave stories like this without grounding. So tell me, do you think the ritual truly backfired or simply revealed the moment wasn't right? The patient who became violent after the exorcism. This case is remembered not because of what happened during the ritual, but because of what followed after it was declared complete. The exorcism ended. The subject stabilized. Then hours later, something changed. The subject had undergone a full sanctioned exorcism. The ritual proceeded according to protocol. Commands were issued. Scripture was read. The subject eventually collapsed, unconscious, an outcome often associated with release. Medical checks confirmed stability. Clergy recorded the case as resolved. For several hours, the patient appeared calm, responsive, cooperative, physically steady. Then, without clear trigger, agitation began. Not traumatic at first, restlessness, short responses, unusual tension. Staff initially attributed it to exhaustion, but the behavior intensified. Movements became abrupt. Speech became forceful. Attempts to restrain the patient were required not for harm, but for safety. The attending priest later noted something unsettling. The reactions were not chaotic, they were focused, as if the subject was responding to something unseen rather than acting randomly. Prayer was attempted again. This time, the patient reacted sharply to specific phrases that had produced no reaction earlier. The room grew tense. The priest ordered the session paused and medical evaluation resumed. No physiological cause was identified. In his report, the priest wrote, "Completion of ritual does not always indicate completion of process." Extended observation was ordered. Over the following days, the patient gradually stabilized. No further disturbances occurred. The church later updated guidance for similar cases, recommending post-ritual monitoring rather than immediate release. The case was sealed once the patient recovered fully. The final notation in the archive reads, "Resolution may be declared in the ritual. Stability must be confirmed afterward." Some cases frighten because of what happens during the ritual. Others because of what happens after. If you're drawn to Catholic mysteries, sealed church cases, or items tied to faith and protection, I keep those collected in my Amazon store. Nothing required. Some people just prefer not to leave stories like this without grounding. So tell me, do you think the reaction meant the ritual failed? Or that the process wasn't finished yet? The possession that spread to another person. This case is remembered not because of the initial possession, but because of what happened to someone who was never the subject. Only one person was under evaluation. Only one ritual was performed. Yet afterward, 2 people required monitoring. The original subject had been admitted after weeks of unusual behavior during prayer. Symptoms were consistent with prior cases: withdrawal, brief agitation, unusual responses to sacred phrases. Clergy authorized a formal exorcism. The ritual proceeded normally. Commands were issued. Scripture was read. Assistants remained present. One assistant priest stood closest to the subject, tasked with observing responses. At the conclusion, the subject collapsed unconscious in outcome, often associated with release. Medical checks confirmed stability. The case was logged as resolved. But within hours, the assistant priest reported something unusual. Not fear, not illness. A sensation he described as familiar pressure, the same feeling he had noticed near the subject during the ritual. At first, it was dismissed as stress. He had been standing closest throughout the session. However, the following day, his reactions during prayer changed. Moments of hesitation, unexpected discomfort during specific invocations. Clergy ordered precautionary evaluation. No medical cause was found. During observation, the assistant priest spoke a phrase he later insisted he had not intended to say. The wording matched something the original subject had said earlier in the week. That detail prompted immediate intervention. Protective prayers were performed not as a full exorcism, but as a precaution. The reaction ceased gradually over the next day. The assistant priest recovered fully. The church later revised protocol. From that point forward, clergy involved in severe cases were monitored after rituals, not just the subject. In the final report, the attending priest wrote, "Proximity can influence outcome. Observation must include everyone present." The Vatican sealed the file. The closing note reads, "Not every transfer is intentional. Some effects follow contact. Some cases frighten because of who is affected. Others because of who wasn't supposed to be." If you're drawn to Catholic mysteries, sealed church cases, or items tied to faith and protection, I keep those collected in my Amazon store. Nothing required. Some people just prefer not to leave stories like this without grounding. So tell me, do you think the presence moved, or did someone simply get too close?